Okay, so everybody, welcome. Thank you for coming today. My name is André. I'm an environmental engineer by training. I had some experience in forestry, the agriculture industries, also in sports, banking, pharma, and insurance business. Today I'm the manager for Beyond Insurance Health Solutions within the healthcare ecosystem team of Ageas. With me today I have Scott Poynton. Did I pronounce it right?
Yes, you did.
Yeah. Scott dedicated his life and study to forest conservation, and he founded the Forest Trust. In 2015, he left his role as CEO of the Forest Trust to focus on another of his passions, accompanying companies and executives through complex and challenging change journeys. In 2020, he founded the Pond Foundation, which seeks to help people responsible for leading large-scale organizations, leading large-scale to help find calm in chaos. Margherita Pagani, an entrepreneur, speaker advisor, and her work revolves around power and purpose and how we can spread and multiply projects that already work, enabling communities from around the world build on effective ways to regenerate nature, our cultures, and traditions. Recently, she has been involved with indigenous communities in the Americas alongside of her work with investors and executives on an international level. Welcome, Margherita, and thanks for joining last minute.
Thank you for the invitation.
Gilles Penha Lopes has a PhD in applied ecology and finished a postdoc on redesign of technological, ecological, and social economic systems at local scales to improve human well-being. Today, he supports individual and organizational development in order to vitalize and evolve territories and sectors. Welcome, Gilles.
Thank you for the invitation.
Okay, so I would start by try to define, in the words of World Health Organization, the meaning of quality of life. Quality of life is the individual's perception of their position in life in the context of the culture and value systems in which they live, and in relation to their goals, expectations, standards, and concerns. It's not uncommon, and I'm not quoting, to hear the words quality of life, income, and longer lives together. Hans Rosling, a Swedish doctor and academic, author of the book Factfulness, said, "The goal of higher income is not just bigger piles of money. The goal of longer lives is not just extra time. The ultimate goal is to have the freedom to do what we want." Do you think freedom can be considered the most important aspect on the perception of life, of quality of life? And how do you think this concept changes between countries with different basic life conditions? I will invite Scott to start with.
Okay, thanks, André. So I'm not so sure freedom is the one thing that we need to choose as our measure of quality of life. I can have a lot of freedom to do what's important to me, but that could damage these people's lives or your lives. I have great freedom, I'm doing a great job, I'm having a great quality of life, but I'm causing everyone else around me to have a poor quality of life. So I don't think freedom as it stands alone is enough, particularly when we're starting to talk about equity. I've done a lot of work over many years. You mentioned the Forest Trust, mediating between large companies and global NGOs beating up on each other because questions of freedom actually were pretty paramount in there. The companies believed they had the right to chop down all the forest and plant palm oil, chop down all the forests and plant plantations, push the local communities off their lands, indigenous communities off their lands. They believed they had the freedom given to them by governments because they had concessions, for example. And NGOs and people around the world said, no, that's not right. You can't be chopping down those forests. You can't be abusing human rights. Oh, well, I got this agreement. I have the freedom. And of course, they were very rich as a result. And so I actually feel that this question of equity needs to come into this thing. And the people who are getting beaten up by the NGOs, they might have been very, very rich, and they were very, very rich. They continue to be very, very rich. But I actually believe from a lot of one-on-one and intimate conversations with them that they weren't very happy. They didn't have a very high quality of life. And they really started to understand that being involved in human rights abuses, even though they may not have been intentional about it, but they were happening as a result of their business. Being involved in the death of orangutans and the extinction of the Sumatran tiger was not something that they wanted to be involved in. They had a lot of freedom, so much freedom that that's what was happening. But when they realised that that was a consequence of the way their business was run and they were the leaders of those business, they found themselves in a desperately unhappy place. And that opened them up to questions around, well, how do we get away from that? How do we move away from that place? And so acknowledging the rights of others seemed to be an important thing. And the place, we eventually made breakthroughs and companies changed their operations completely, led to changes in whole industries when people started to acknowledge that their personal freedom wasn't paramount to their own happiness, their own quality of life, and certainly not the quality of life for those around them and the planet as a whole. So yeah, that's my experience. I think it's supporting people to really connect with, my experience is supporting people to really connect with who they are as people and act from that place helps them have a much higher quality of life and to support all of those that they interact with to have a high quality of life as well. And we were talking earlier, not everyone has a great set of values, but I think I hold to the belief that most people are good. They may be doing bad things, they may be linked to bad things, but deep down inside them, there's something that you can find if you dig deep enough. And if you can inspire people to live from that place, my experience is very, very bad things can be turned, for the planet, for people, can be turned to good things. And so my experience is if you can help people connect to who they are as a person and live from that place, then their quality of life just goes through the roof, as does the people that they impact. So that seems to be a lesson from my work.
Okay, thank you, Scott. This reminds me of your recent experiences. Do you share a similar view with Scott about freedom on the quality of life and more of the real connection you have with yourself and between the communities?
Yeah, I honestly couldn't agree more because we tend to forget that what we call reality or the system or whatever is the natural extension of how we apply what we can call freedom, or what we can call in my work, for example, power. Power is a word that in our culture we don't really like because we mostly know it in the context of abuse. And I say it often in my content, in my trainings, that we tend to forget that every single social or environmental challenge can be traced back to one or another abuse of power, either on nature, on each other, or on ourselves. And so if we don't talk about it from that place, we're just trying to decorate the branches of a tree that we're not really exploring at the depths that it needs to. And this conversation on freedom, it's the same language that I have in the context of power, because it's not anymore about whether we have power or not over what we consider inferior or what we have power upon, but how we use it and what for. How do we use our freedom or what for? It's the same exact conversation, and I couldn't agree more with what Scott was sharing, because one of the great challenges, I think, is that over the last, at some point in the chapter of my life, I'm going to go to the indigenous part, but I also worked in tech in spite of my fine art degree. And we tend to forget that the last 15 years, we have decided to create technologies and digital technologies and information technologies that democratize so much information, forgetting that the hardware of our brain is not necessarily being updated, that we have decided to pour on our brains an amount and complexity of information that we're not necessarily wired or trained to elaborate or to process. And this, to me, why is important and why does it have to do, what does it have to do with freedom? Because we're not wired to elaborate the complexities of information that we have right now. And we tend, in this sector in specific, to think that to more information, there is going to be better or more action, which is exactly the opposite. The more we overwhelm people with information about everything that is wrong or everything that is not working, even if it's right and true, the more most our brains or systems actually shut down. Even more so, building on what something that Scott was just mentioning, we are the product of a very specific culture when it comes to the idea of what are we supposed to do with our freedom and what are we supposed to do when we want to change something, and the answer is find the guilty one. Make sure that they know that they're guilty, make sure that they know that they're wrong. And I'm not saying it's not true. I'm saying, behaviorally speaking, if we keep framing an environment based on guilt and shame, we're actually decreasing the possibilities for certain people with certain freedoms, certain knowledge of systems, Titanics, if you want, and powers to actually do different. And we less and less every day find environments where those that we consider people of power can actually be met at a place where they can say, it is true. I was either ignorant or I was stretching it and I was incoherent for a while, but I want to reconsider my position, either because I became the heir of the company of my parents, or I inherited this, or I made this fortune, and the story of success that I was sold, I don't believe in it anymore. There's a lot of shame there. By raise of hand, who of you has ever hurt someone and didn't want to? By raise of hand. Friend, a colleague, a family member. It's the same thing. When we realize that we didn't want to, but we hurt something for a very long time, or we want to acknowledge it because denial exists, we need a space where we can reconsider first our identity and if we are worth that change of trajectory or not. So for me, actually being able to meet each other in 2022 from a place that gives for granted, takes for granted, that we're all trying to reconsider things that we feel shameful and guilty about. And it's more important to understand the right sequence for you to steer your boat. We cannot go around feeling guilty every time that we take a car, necessarily. And from there on, right? What is the right sequence to steer your boat? Because abrupt steering never steered anything. It breaks boats. So how we use that freedom and what for is, and what systems then, what architecture are we able to build as an extension of that new intention, I would say is the chance we have to build a different type of, economic structures, projects, and the indigenous communities and my work in that space, and then I will wrap up. I don't want to take so much time. It's an experience, I spend about 1/3 of my time with indigenous communities or ancestral traditions. The way Tyson Yunkaporta, an Aborigines professor and teacher, would say, it's not that they're better cultures than us. It's not that we are all evil and they're all good or whatever. But it's all their cultures. And the way Tyson says it, they just have gone through the cycles already. Most of them have already gone through the phase of obsession to access power, or obsession to see how far can we take the power, how much can we extract, how much can we, does this needs time? Let me see how I can make it in my own will. And they landed, not all of them, most of them, on conscious application of power. I can use these powers or technology however I want, but do I want to? And how do I want to use them? So in my recent experience, seeing 400 leaders coming together to discuss how collectively we want to use these powers, and on some things that don't agree with one another, right? But how else can we meet each other? How else can we see the planet as an organism? How else power can be applied? What is regenerative power? Those are the type of questions that those cultures are at least willing, way more than us, most of the time, to at least sit down with long enough for new answers, I guess, to be formed.
Okay, so we're talking about identity, and we talk about honesty also. I don't want to oversimplify it, but...
I mean, we have a whole identity of who we are. Like, around Renaissance, we have decided that we are better and above nature. And we run with that.
Coming from that, like honesty and identity and the search for it inside of us, how can we use cooperation to make it from going from an individual level to a community and society level? Because if that's leverage point or a point of rupture in the status quo? How can we use cooperation to do that? Gilles,
Yeah.
maybe.
Thank you. And I'm navigating that because I would say yes to this freedom, and at the same time I've been studying mainly eco-villages, transition town movements, and so on, and a lot of their purpose was really about breaking free from the cultural paradigm, from the ways of thinking, the ways of behaving, the ways of being, the ways of doing things, about something else is possible. This is a slide, thank you for putting, that shows how free life is. I mean, from 3.8 million years ago, that life is being free. It's creating, it's evolving, it's growing, its complexity, it's going all over the place. And now the next one, the same thing as humans. We have been evolving, and where I would like to go is about, for me, a lot of the health that a lot of these communities are searching for is this freedom of being and becoming, being able to break free from these paradigms, really reconciling with older traditions, with nature, and really understanding how different ways of being. We talked about being at the source, about each of us being true, sharing our feelings, sharing our thoughts, creating together, about doing some things differently. For example, in the UK, they have this law of experimentalism, that you could break the law if you're experimenting something that allows you to take us to another place. So for me, I would say that being healthy communities, healthy individuals, they are more free from these limitations. This is an interbeing type of health. I mean, this is the interpersonal, and then the relationship, organization. So health is really nestedness, is nested, and this is a salutogenesis. I mean, when I look into about how to promote health, it's really it's not avoiding sickness, which is at the bottom, but really to provide an environment where health is, a healthy ecosystem creates conditions conducive to more life. So how can we create systems, communities, organizations, neighborhoods, that the fact that they exist, they create more life, more health, and evolve a long time. So this is where I would bring a bit of the freedom.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think Scott might want to comment on this, but let me just bring something, because we are talking about communities. And this is not just philosophy. So there's science on this. And there's a study from Harvard, which I brought today. It's on happiness, in which it was done over a period of 80 years. It basically states that embracing community helps us live longer and also be happier. It basically says that good relationships make a good life and have a powerful influence on our health. And you were talking about communities, and I would ask if we can learn something from the way, are the natural communities better than the human communities, and what can we learn from nature when we think about building communities and strong communities?
Yeah, I don't know what's better or worse. I tend not to think about those things. I was just thinking, as Mag and Gilles were talking, I've spent a lot of time in dark rooms. I call it in the dark room. And I spent a lot of time with leaders of companies and with NGOs. And Meg talked about shame. There's a lot of shame in those interactions. And that's how the NGOs inspire the companies to pay attention. They try and shame them, publicly shame them. And how do you break through from that? Well, it generally doesn't happen in public. I spent a lot of time in the rooms, on the 36th floor of large buildings with the leaders of some of the world's largest agribusiness companies who are chopping down forests, doing all sorts of bad human rights things. And they didn't feel good. They weren't happy. Let me say that. I think that's an understatement. They weren't happy because they were losing business, but that was one thing. But the real reason they weren't happy was that they were being shamed in their community. And their community may have been other rich people in Jakarta or other rich people in Singapore. It might have been their family. And And how do we break through that? Because what I'm interested in, I've spent a lot of my time out in the bush, as we say in Australia, and out in these situations. How do you break through when you've got someone who's aggrieved and someone who's got the power, someone who's feeling shame, and there's all sorts of emotions there. And this is why, we talked about finding calm in chaos. When someone's giving you a hard time, you spend a lot of time in your head trying to rationalise it. Oh, I'm not like that, that's not who I am, they're wrong. And then people say, well, where do the NGOs get their money from? And they go into these all sorts of confusing discussions. And they get completely wound up. And someone says, oh, you need to do this. Someone says, you need to do that. And they get themselves spinning around in circles. And they're not calm. And so when you're not calm, you can't really connect to this fundamental self that you are. And this is my experience of just going in the room with these people and listening to them. And, because I'm interested in how we make change. How do we can't stay where we are. So how do we start the process? And the hardest bit is always the first step, right, of any journey. Getting the snowball rolling. And my experience is when you've got pain and suffering and shame and blame and heartache and money gets in there and all sorts of politics and corruption and nonsense, you just best listen to people and let them pour out their soul. And I've been in rooms for 2 years listening to people and they finally get there. Others it took 2 weeks, others it just took a few days. But you've got to let people pour out their grief and suffering, even the powerful, because they're the ones that most need to change. But deep down inside, my experience is they're not bad people. There may be bad consequences happening as a result of their actions. But as Meg said, it's not always clear to them that that's the case. They're sitting on the 36th floor. What do they know about what's going on out in the bush? When you bring that to them, as the NGOs tend to do rather violently, when they finally get through the pain and suffering, they say, yeah, we don't want to be linked to the death of orangutans. That's not who we are. We don't want child labour in our supply chain. That's not who we are. Well, who are you? Well, who are you? What do you mean? Well, what do you care about? Usually you get this very large blank look. You say, well, I don't want to be linked to that. Okay, so you don't want to be linked to that. And within 10 minutes, you've got a policy. I negotiated the world's first no deforestation commitments and no exploitation, free, prior and informed consent for Indigenous people. And it was done in 10 minutes once they found that calm to get out of here and come down into here. Mm-hmm. And they started operating from their values, not from profit and loss, KPIs, what am I going to tell the share market, all that sort of nonsense. It came down to, well, I don't care about that. I just don't want to be linked to human rights abuses. Okay, so how do you change your business so that you don't? And they're experts at that. So then the snowball gets rolling. But the hardest part of a change journey for a community, for anyone, is those first conversations when you've got conflict in the room. You might have a community that wants to get out of the situation it's in, but this person thinks you should do that way. This person thinks you should do that way. How do you get through that? And I come to the word you mentioned, is cooperation. So I've spent my life trying to help people find a path to cooperation. And the path to cooperation goes through anger, indignation, shame, all of these terrible emotions, to the point where finally, the only way you can get to cooperation is people have to first feel lost. Mm. You must go through a feeling of loss. You don't know what to do. And I call it the great fog of the unknown. And when people are in this great place of we don't know what to do, is when you can start helping them find their own journey. It's not for me to go in there and say, oh, you need to do these 10 things. Here's your list, get on with it. It's like, what do you want to do? You're the CEO of the world's largest palm oil company. What do you want to do? And when you start on that journey from here, when someone comes and says, boss, it's going to cost us a lot more money, I don't care. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to be linked to the damage to those Indigenous people because I don't care about profit and loss. I now understand from those NGOs or whoever, those, and there's usually a few swear words, but they woke me up and I don't want to be linked to that. So go away, you're the smart guy in the room, you go and work out how we can keep our profit and loss under control whilst we're not doing those human rights abuses. And then off it goes. And that's how you get change. But they've first got to have this utter feeling of loss before they'll start listening to other people. And that's when they connect to their values. And that's why I say my job is to help them find calm in chaos so they can travel that, I call it this arc, from anger and despair and pain and all this sort of down to feeling of loss. And then they start coming out the other side. And that's when you can get whole transformations. The Indonesian palm oil sector used to be responsible for 1 million hectares of deforestation a year. The last 4 years, it's now 20,000 hectares. 20,000 hectares, too much. But that's been led by the companies inspiring the government to make laws to say, we don't want to be linked to that stuff. And in the Amazon, before the most recent government, they'd followed a similar journey. Not only about deforestation, about recognising people's rights. Unfortunately, a lot of that's been turned around. And that's because the person who gets in charge, who makes the decision, who has the power, maybe doesn't hold the same values. So it's an eternal journey of trying to hold that space for the good fundamental values that people have to shine. Not easy, but I think that's the path.
This is a top-down approach, so getting people to be honest with themselves and find calm in chaos.
I don't think it's top
Works
down.
better with people in power, or can
Well, usually it's the
come
people
from-
who aren't in power that raise their voices up so the people in power hear them. And that's been the trigger in all of the things that I've done. And that's where those who aren't in power can benefit from the support of international NGOs who do have avenues to shake those in power. But ultimately it's the people that are causing the pain for others that need to change. And it's usually the people with power that are doing that. And so giving the Indigenous communities, or let's say those those who are living in inequity, a voice so that their situation can be made clear to those in power, who maybe 99% of the time will ignore it. But if you get one, and if that one happens to be the largest company in the sector, and they start taking business off the others because all their customers don't want to be linked to those bad things either, then the whole thing just snowballs. And that's what happened. That's what happened with no deforestation and no exploitation of people.
Okay. So I'm thinking influencing powerful people to be honest with themselves and
Right.
really find calm in chaos as a possible leverage point for
It's my
trickling down,
experience.
from your experience.
It's not trickling down.
Trickling
It can be massive. It can be, when the people in power start making amazing, unprecedented decisions, the whole thing flips. It doesn't trickle.
Okay.
It flips.
It flips.
It flips. That's my experience.
Okay, thank you, Scott. And can there be another possible leverage point coming from another place in the community? What can be the role of the communities as a whole from doing no harm to the world and minimizing our impact to start doing real good and really regenerate the system?
I mean, I have to say it's very unfair to speak after Scott because there is not much we can add. There could be found relevant to this, but if I may, Scott, you just touched on, of course, very important aspect of what feeling ashamed means in my experience, not just working with executives, similarly, or investors at any, if you want, level of society, because we need to remember that one of the reasons why when we are in that place of shame, it's not necessarily automatic to feel lost or stuck or have a language to explain what we're feeling, let alone having a language to process it. It's because we tend to forget that our story of success is not just a story of success. It's not just a script that we're running through. It's a very specific story of two things. One is significance and one is belonging. Because we chase a story of success that we have chosen for their promises. And this also comes from the activist point of view, the one that shames the powerful one. They have a very specific idea of success, meaning who do I belong with if I am significant in which way? So yes, of course, it's super important and it's tricky because it takes some more private space. It takes different conversations when we talk about the steering of Titanic in what we consider the powerful, hierarchically speaking ones. But there is no one shift without the other. In the programs that I run, I talk about the concept of gates, like doors or portals. Like when we arrive at the point in which we can no longer deny that we're not okay, that we're looking for another story for ourselves or our organizations, there is a gate, and by definition, at the gate, there is a price to pay. Part of that price to pay, and this is for individual crises or collective ones, part of the price to pay is our old identity. Sometimes an identity, I work with family offices as well, so sometimes an identity that has been passed on for centuries, a story that you were born into. You don't know anything else. There is a series of prices to pay when we decide to cross that gate, and one of which is also these churning walls. Like you speak of community. Community is, in one way that we can see it, is remembering that we are cells to a body. The same way cells in our body, like what's more important? What organ in our body is more important? Most people in our culture go straight to the brain. And we were talking about the other ways of knowing. When something hurts, and we don't have a painkiller, or we don't know what's happening. Like, community is remembering we're cells to a body, so every single one of the cells is important, and it's important that it is free to fulfill its promise, to fulfill whatever pulse of life it's meant to express. So from my perspective, while it's true that hierarchically we have said the higher 36 floors are more important than the others, there is no one without the other. So communities have the power today to come to a place where we can say we're all questioning the same things. And then those of us that choose to go through that gate, to offer in sacrifice their old identities or the city where we live in, the lifestyle that we have, or whatever, for not necessarily a better or worse one, a different one that responds to our value, we tend to forget that some relationships might be the prices that we leave at the gate, but there is, by definition, community on the other side as well. Because nothing that we're trying to do, we're the only ones that try to do it. Absolutely nothing. Change of lifestyle, change of how we act upon our purpose. So can we trust that as a community, as we go through our individual processes, it's the fact that we will choose the courage and the hope to choose these gates that will find our allies on the other side. We cannot expect to find them before. And that law, I call it law of permeability or resonance. Like by definition, when we choose to tune in on another radio station and we decide to operate from the place, automatically we find those that are trying to do the same thing. We're not meant to continue the story of isolation. We're not meant to continue the story of the chosen one. We have more books on the chosen one that is supposed to be the one amongst everybody else. Nobody is the chosen one, and everybody is. Everybody is meant to find how to express that function that allows community. Community is not about being all the same. Community, to me, is about how do I acknowledge what I am here to bear, what I am here to carry, what I am here to express, and how do I recognize that it is community that will point me in the right direction, not my mind. I call it the other ways of knowing. It's not my mind. It's the people around me. The same way we tend to say, the people around you sees our talents or our values the most because we are so struck with other stories. It's the environments and the people around me that when I try to express my freedom or power in another way, the response is pretty clear. If we're using a regenerative community framework or power application of whatever, we see it immediately in the environment around us. In the same way, if we pour water on a plant or something else, we have an immediate response. Sometimes it's hard from those 36 floors to have that permeability because we're told that as success or significance means to tighten up, to isolate, to find your own role. There is no your role without anybody else around you. So maybe remembering the way nature does things. For nature, the leaf is not important than the ladybug, that is not important than the jaguar, that is not important than the drop of water. Nature knows the leaf is meant to die and to become water for the tree. So both what are you and your functions. Observing any organism, I think can give us a lot of language to remember how to be community. And there is no community if we don't fulfill our role. Our role, not those 3 scripts that our culture made available to us. It's not just those, and not the way we have been taught that they need to go, in my opinion.
We are more connected, but maybe more isolated. And Meg was mentioning isolation as something that can hinder like the success of transformations in communities. What's your take on what she was saying, and also Scott, and what can be? Do you think we're traveling for a more isolated place or for a more connected place?
No, I got this essence, being at the essence of going to the purpose, really being able to speak straight to somebody's being instead of the persona that people have. And you mentioned that, and then the person that got it, when speaks to the financer in chief, whatever, to do the same thing to him so he can do to his team. And suddenly you have this cascade or shift as well, not necessarily trickle down, where people are awakening. Who am I, and why I chose this place to be? And why am I here, even if I need to shift? And you brought a lot about this being at the community, this interbeing. For me, this is where people start coming together to a kind of a belonging, because we have a system that supports a lot I can live by myself if I have money and some freedom. I don't need anybody. I'll just go to the supermarket, I buy food, I buy a car, I buy a home. I don't need relationships to survive until I die. But I use an artificial artifact, which is money, that came to substitute relationships in a lot of the senses. Before, people lived in a community, and they didn't exchange in kind of, you gave me half a chicken, and then I'm going to give you 2 kilos of rice. People would nurture the community based on what was produced, and the abundant would circulate. And so, and about the roles, sometimes the word of role gets too much about what's my job. And role is really about when we get into this position of really who am I in the communities, there is not just this cognitive work about who am I cognitively. It's about who am I in the physical, mental, spiritual, emotional self. All of these align in order to be able to relate at a deeper level. And for me, the community, and especially the community that it's diverse enough in order to sustain itself and create a vortex that creates more conditions to life. So, for example, if we think about a tree requires bacteria in the roots, requires worms that degrades leaves. It requires pollinators to do their stuff. So there is a kind of a guild, which is the minimum ecosystem unit, that ecosystem diverse, tree, bee, worm, they're all diverse. All of them are unique, and they are living together just like our organs. Each of them operates at a specific condition and require different energies. And we as a whole, we could see ourselves as a community of cells and organs working together in order to grow and evolve. So for me, a community, it has this equity about the diversity and the capacity enough to sustain itself and evolve, as well as and the closer it becomes to a living system, the more thriving the community is, okay? And where I want to go, the question, about the individuality.
I think you're going on another direction. It's cool because you're going to a place
I just like to say something, because, for example, for me, and because this is in insurance, imagine Ageas, instead of thinking about individual companies, cars, whatever, starts thinking about bioregions or communities. And if this community is healthy, if people have more relationships between them, whatever, my health is better because I'm listening, I can share my emotions, I'm not stressed, I can work it out. The community, I have a belonging. Imagine that if the system is healthy about biodiversity, it means that when the water comes, it's retained by the soil, whatever, so there is less floods. So these people in this bioregion, they need to pay less for their insurance that place where they impermeabilize the soil, everybody lives in their own buildings, they don't talk to each other, whatever, because it's much more prone to risk about health issues, stress, floods. So for me, it would be a shift of looking at the system as a living system with a minimum unit, and for me would be municipality, water basin, would something that brings cultural, ecological, economic boundaries, and say, we're going to start analyzing by this definition, which is more natural, they're artificial. So for me, these structures and institutions, they have a role to take the plug out of us still being evaluated as fragments, individuals, isolated, and so on. So they just like to bring this here as well.
Are there like specific good examples of work being done in a few bioregions? Do you remember?
With what I said, no. I know that, for example, on climate risk, it's being done a bit like that. So places that nurture their water cycle, they are less prone to flooding, so they should pay less. But we should avoid this average categorization and apply it to everything. Otherwise, because otherwise it's seen that I'm just a machine. Because I belong to a category, I pay a certain amount, and not seen as a part of a certain whole. Nature works as wholes and not as fragments. You can't define a bee outside of context. And a lot of our system categorizes a bee. If I will do an insurance, I'm going to be 41 years old, I'm this, I'm that, so it fits in this category. You pay 50 euros a month. Well, you don't know what do I do, where I belong, in which community I am. Why that? So
okay, I don't know how we are with time, but we're talking about a lot of concepts, like really great concepts and ideas, and the reflection is very good. And I recently heard someone saying that we're on a fast track to human disaster because nature always survives. All the concepts that we have been talking here today, and they're very diverse, how can we get some of them and bring them into our education programs and into our ways of living in a practical way? And I want to get this what we've been discussing into closer to a practical steps, or not quick wins. And I don't want to get very practical, but how can we bring some of what we've been talking into our lives and education programs, since this is a forum on education also.
Yeah. Well, shall I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
We're not sure.
Well, for me, you mentioned cooperation and climate change and all of the disasters we face in the world. Climate change is a failure of cooperation, of humans unable to agree and find a way forward. And all of the big transformations that I've been engaged with is where people get out of their head and they get down into their gut and they start navigating from that place, living their life from there. And I say to people, you need your head. Like, once you decide which journey you're going to travel, you might want to get there a bit more efficiently. And the brain's pretty good for that. But our society in particular, Western society, I think, therefore I am. I mean, when you talk to someone, you listen to the next conversation. Oh, I think this, I think that, I think that. They thought this, they thought that. When did you hear someone say, I feel we should do this? You don't hear it. And my work over so many years is when you're with people and you inspire them to start acting from what they feel, not from what they think. And they start navigating with resonance for what they feel. I call it, I work for the Pond Foundation, but I have another little company called A Different Way. And I talk about this different way of being, where you navigate by resonance. So this feels good, I'm going to keep doing that. There's dissonance here, I'm not going to do that. I'm in a job where my values are compromised. Every day I go to work, my values are compromised. I need to get out of that job. And so we're talking about well-being, we're talking about happiness earlier. If you are living, the closer you are living according to who you are as a person, the happier you will be. The higher the quality of life you'll have. And in that place, you will influence the people around you to follow that path too. And I think, people say, oh, how did you sit with those leaders of these companies and help them move. Well, I just listened to them and let them find their path. And when they were, oh, I think we need to do this, I think we need to do that, I said, well, what do you feel? Just little prompts, little nudges. Well, I don't want to be linked to this, I don't want to be linked to that. It was always framed as a negative. Well, what's the path for you to go down that journey? So what I spend a lot of my time doing, I've spent a lot of time mediating and being in the room with people who are either, this one's at conflict, maybe in a room with the people who are hating those people, and then going in the room with those people, and they hate those, and eventually getting them in the room together so they can find a path together. And it's never through intelligent arguments, never once. And it's always through, when you said that, it hurt me. Well, that's because you were doing that bad thing. Yeah, okay, I know. And then suddenly, progress starts to come. So if we're going to talk about education, for me, I believe we need to help people understand that getting off in our little tribes and firing rockets at each other, it has got us to where we are. That's why we have climate change. It's why we have human rights abuses. It's why we have all of these bad things that are happening in the world. They're failures of cooperation. And we can find a way to cooperate if we understand, when we're fighting at this level, go to 10,000 feet. Can you find common ground? No, go to 20. And if you go high enough, the common ground is our humanity. And most of us, as I said, there's a few folk out there that are a bit dodgy, but most of us have pretty good values. Somewhere, buried deep inside. You may have to dig to find them, but they're there. And when you can get people operating from this place, we find commonality as humans. So I think when it comes to education, if we want to have happy lives and quality of life, and we want to deal with the various thresholds we're crossing at a great rate of knots, and secure humanity's future on the planet, we need to learn to navigate our way according to our feelings and our connection to who we are as people. And if we can teach people and kids to act from that place, then I think the world will be a better place. We've got to get out of our heads and get into our guts and start acting from there.
And can we teach that early in life?
Yes, I think we can. I think we can teach it late in life. I mean, I've sat with 70-year-old chairs of some of the world's largest companies that are trashing the world's forests, and they've crossed the bridge. So we can all do it, but you've got to, one of the things I would say is, it's so wonderful to see young people, mostly young people these days, but certainly when I've been involved in these things, it's been older people too, activists. Everyone gets excited when, Mary or Johnny comes home and they've been to a school protest. That's great. That's great. We need activists. But we've got 10 million activists. We've got for every 10 million activists, we've got one mediator. Mm-hmm. We need people who can go into the dark rooms with the people who are suffering and help them cross the bridge. We need to teach people the skill of listening, of being calm, of not rising when someone starts abusing you. I've had people spit on me and all sorts of things because I thought I was Greenpeace. It's like, okay, just brush your glasses and carry on. Get that out of your system. It's like you've got to squeeze the infection out, the pus out of the sore. And when that's gone, you can have a better conversation. Mm-hmm. But the pain and suffering to get that out is too much for some people. They cannot travel that journey. And if you've got 10 million more activists telling them that they're evil, we won't get change. We need someone to go in there and help them clean the sore, patch it up, and start again. And I think that's what the world needs. Great that we've got so many activists, it's wonderful to see, but we need listeners, people who can go into the room with those who are deemed evil and show them compassion and help them find a different way. That's what we need.
Gilles, you're an academic, you're a researcher, so maybe you're closing to the educating system. Can you teach people to be real with themselves early in life, probably?
Yes, and it's very different from what we are used to today. For example, a lot of our education system is still based on knowledge transfer. You're coming here, you don't know anything, I'm going to teach you. You have to memorize, and then the right answer is what I told you about. And this is, according to, for example, Theory U, Presencing Institute, is the second level of education. Afterwards, you even have facilitation of knowledge that you bring diversity and you allow the knowledge to be transferred between, and something new happening, people being open to other knowledges, other realities, and so on. And the fourth level is about learning while you're co-creating the next paradigm. So for me, whether it's kids or companies, it's about, we are here. What really drives you to do next? What drives us to do next? And let's learn on our journey while we are doing. So even personal development, for example, a lot of the people in companies with shame usually comes with three basic feelings. It's sadness of what they know that they're doing. It's anger because they don't want to do it, but they kind of feel forced by the system, and fear that they don't know what else to do. And through about starting something new and shifting paradigms, understanding what are the patterns of competition, of thinking about profit-oriented, and really start changing, starts opening up people. And for me, the education, the experience that I want to start having, and there are some schools starting to have it, it's seeing each child as unique. The school is like the neighborhood environment, and then is having the kids involved in the activities of the neighborhood, whether it's gardening, working, making bread, working with wood. It's applied, and it's not done within an artificial context where there is a teacher and there are pupils. So yes, there are a caretaker understanding how to protect them from some of the violence, let's call it, of reality, but involve them in. Otherwise, I mean, I speak by my own experience. I became like 22, whatever, when I left university. It was always a kind of artificial environment until I get to reality. I was even a father without ever seeing somebody giving birth. And how come I'm a father without experiencing birth in my community? So everything is so isolated. So for me, it's creating contexts where we are co-creating and being involved and really breaking the separation of school and workers and unemployment and senior homes, and really start seeing that as part of the community. It requires a whole community for us to shift.
Okay, thank you. Meg, we are a bit tight with time. Someone gave me a really bad look down there.
I will be quick.
What's your take on this, and maybe give some space to the audience also to have a few questions, if so.
I once again couldn't be on this panel with more inspiring people that I agree with. I think that if I can share something from my experience of working with, again, executives and investors, sometimes women as well, don't find many, but they're there. We tend to forget that when we are reconsidering these things, when we talk about education, sometimes we don't know what is it we want to do instead. There is dissociation that we find. We either have created or we have inherited epigenetically. So if I think about a space of education that can create the conditions for us to tune back in with those other ways of knowing out of our brain-based scripts, there is 3 points that come up to me and are the same ones that you said. One is fear, the other one is pain or hurt, and the other one is rage. And it's pain and rage, the ones that I wanted to leave somehow with, because sometimes when we have dissociated for so long, in order to try to fit that script, we literally don't have a language for what else we want to do, like how to read that compass. And something that has worked very well, and I saw it over and over again, is understanding that the opposite of hurt or pain, in spite of what our culture says, is not healed, is not having any pain, but is understanding that those things that in our life we carry, either trauma or something that hurts, are also the points where we're meant to pour medicine. Our purpose is not such if we don't decode a part of that medicine into what we're doing, which doesn't mean that if you have survived a deadly sickness, then you need to devote your entire life to that. It's just a universal language that we must include in our education system, for instance. And the other one is rage, especially with these like galloping mindfulness anything sector at the moment, where the underlying narrative is that we all should be calm and unwavering or unupset about anything, which I do agree. We need to go to this place of calmness, but we also need to go there without denying what this rage is trying to tell us. That the opposite of rage is not calm, it's creative expression. Whatever makes us feel angry, it's a provocation from force, vox, call, a provocation, a call for us to present ourselves for something that upsets us. While remembering that we have the choice to respond to that rage, applying our powers in a way that is not destructive, that is creative, is even regenerative. I think that it might sound very simple or very basic, hurt and rage, but I learned that both for those of us that inherited a lot of this dissociation or stories that are much bigger than we are, to start with those very simple tools in our day-by-day life of changing our gaze and lenses on what hurt means, the value of it, Gabor Mate being one of the, of course, people that decoded the most language on what it means to live in a trauma-based society, and the power of rage, and what it means to act upon that rage in a regenerative way. I think that if I have to think about a new education system on top of what, of course, was already shared, indigenous people don't understand how someone can make everybody see it and say things that are not there. I would say that those are some of the cornerstones that I would suggest for that system.
Okay, nice. So I feel that this has been this has been a really good conversation, and I learned a lot with you guys. So thank you for today. I don't know if there's anyone in the room wants to do a question.
We have someone there.
Thank you, and thank you all for your time. Something Scott said really resonated with me, that being an activist is not enough. We need more mediators. And my question is there a path to become one? How do you propose to be one, and what can we do to have more of mediators in our society? Thank you so much for all of your time. I really find it really interesting.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I have been thinking about that. How do we get more people who are able to go into that place? And I think what we do need is just people who have spent time in that place, in between those two worlds, in between those protagonists, just to share their experiences. You know, I'm not a great fan of training courses and things like that, because that gets you up in your head. Then you've got to do an exam, right? You've got to show that you've got the knowledge. You know, whereas, you know, I've done a lot of retreats and sessions with people where we do role plays, and they do it, you know, and you say, and then you see how it goes. And so I just think that the people who've been in those dark rooms need to start sharing their experiences. What happened in there? And you've got to be careful, because you can't give away things that are confidential, but you can talk in general terms. You know, if someone starts crying or something, you don't put that in the book. Oh, he started crying, you know, because that's pretty embarrassing. But, you know, what happens if people show emotions? You know, and just sort of talking those things through. We need to have much more sharing, because unfortunately, from my experience, I don't know too many people who play that role. They're a handful, and everyone gets celebrated because they're the activist. The mediator is, the mediators do work in the shadows. They're unseen, right? Because they're not the ones out the front saying, here's my press release, I've just mediated this dispute between these two people, isn't it great? No, they are doing the press release, and you're in the back saying, oh, that was hard work. You've got to have no ego. You're a guide. You're a guide. You're helping people find their way, their own journey. And the way of the guide is a humble way and an egoless way. So we've got to help people find that path to humility, so that they can stand aside and just help the journey. But be integral to it, but not be the person that stands out the front saying, look what I did. No, they did it, you just helped. So we need to try and help people. We need to share those experiences. I think that's the only way. And there's not many people out there doing that work, and that's part of the reason why we're in the poo. There's not a lot of mediators. Everyone's celebrating. Look at the US. They fire rockets at each other in court. And as soon as, or a law gets passed, and when the Republicans come in, they make a law, then the Democrats come in and they get rid of it, and then the Republicans come in and get rid of it. That's no way to fix the planet. We've got to get people operating from here. And that's what the peacemakers, they're not just mediators, they're peacemakers. We need peacemakers.
If I can add quickly, of course, couldn't agree more. Coming from a generation, if you want, that has been overflooded with we should be part of the change, and the NGOs and the social enterprises, this big, revolution that started with big society capital and Ashoka and some very few players 20 years ago or so. I think that journey starts when you're finding yourself on this side of allegedly the good ones, so the activist, the social entrepreneur, the impact entrepreneur, the NGO, and you see that side of the system is also perpetuating the same ways, and you're sick of it. You don't want to be part of projects that perpetuate the codependency between an NGO and a community, or that use funds in a way that is incoherent, and you understand that there is no good side. When you hit that crisis, that breakup, and you go through the phases of the breakup, I think that's when your journey starts. Because I also am not a fan of training programs. As I said, nobody is meant to be, making people sit down. So we're meant to develop education that is the most experiential as possible. And we can hold spaces that, of course, do that, more or less intense dive-ins. But it starts with every person, as I said, is upset about something. It has this really bothers me, and I want to do something about it by, first of all, making sure that I don't perpetuate any of it with my own time and my own work. And so I think I saw it in myself, but I also feel that, better than think, that every mediator, by definition, being a bridge maker between spaces that do not speak with one another or not that easily, is meant to develop his or her own language. That maybe those bridges that some of us have spent decades hoping to find them in the world, some of us literally spent decades, I know I did, asking myself, that there is a little Meg in me, is how is it not done? It's because you're meant to do it. You have looked for it for decades. You know everything of that bridge, or those bridges. At some point, you get to the point in which you're okay, maybe I need to code or weave this damn thing that I'm looking for. And it comes with joy. It comes with a lot of crisis, because you won't find many people that will necessarily fully understand what you're doing, this spider work of weaving what is not there. But it starts with what you find yourself in my experience.